All right, I think we're still waiting on a few folks, but we've got a large group today, so I want to go ahead and get us started. Again, thank you all for joining us for what is the first of 4 coach events for this year's strategy workshop. This is our first time doing this via Zoom, so fingers crossed. Again, some high-level, just logistical notes. If you could all keep yourselves on mute until the Q&A portion at the end, when we'll specifically call on people, that would be great. If your name is not appearing by your video for some reason, just go ahead and take a minute to right-click on your video and hit rename so that we know who everybody is. We'll be using the chat function for the Q&A period later this afternoon, so just go ahead and take a sec to familiarize yourselves with that. And so everybody is aware this session is being recorded only for distribution among coach members. All right. So today's high-level agenda, we'll start out with a quick round of introductions so that you're familiar with who the coach team is. Then we'll run through the analysis that Dominique Foster has done for us of the coach results given COVID-19. And then we'll take a brief break. When we come back from the break, we'll all be in breakout rooms and we'll discuss the case that was sent out to everybody yesterday. Don't worry if you didn't get a chance to read it, I'll circulate that link again. And we'll discuss how to handle open text comments. And then we'll have a wrap up and assign you some homework for next time. So getting started, I'm Lauren Scungio. I am the Assistant Director of Engagement for Coach. And I'm joined here by many of my colleagues today, which is exciting. So I'll hand it over to Todd now to introduce himself.
Hello, everybody. My name is Todd Benson. I've met the vast majority of you guys at one point or another over the past year. I'm very excited that you're all still here and we've managed to get through a pretty crazy year. I'm the Associate Director here at Coach. I work with Kiernan on our kind of research initiatives. I work with Obi, our applications developer, on reporting and data management. And I work with Lauren on marketing and recruitment. And I get to work with all of you. So I have a pretty cool job. I'll pass it on to the next person on the list, which I believe is Amal.
Hi all, I'm Amal Kumar. I'm a doctoral candidate at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I've been with Coach pretty much since I started in 2016. At Coach, I handle research data requests and generally relations with our faculty and research partners. I'm happy to chat about that if anyone's interested. We have a lot of great data. And other than that, happy to be here.
Mai, you're up next.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Again, my name is Mai Vang, and I'm a 4th-year doctoral student in higher education at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and I work with Coach as a qualitative research analyst.
Thanks everybody for being here at this workshop. My name is Kiernan Matthews. I am the Executive Director and Principal Investigator of Coach. I've been at Coach for 16 years now, and leading it for the last 10 or so. And I have been, being present at the creation, I have seen this workshop evolve over 14 years since we've been doing it. First as something we called the Users Workshop. Then, since no one wanted to be seen as a user, we called it Leaders Workshop and got a much greater attendance. And now we have a Strategy Workshop. And so, in fact, we've really been adapting this program to changes in higher ed year after year. And so this year is really no different. It's an online edition, really just the next evolution. And still, this workshop is an integral part of our vision for faculty equity, and for organizational change. It's also an integral part of your journey to better support all of your faculty. A provost said it best in a book, the first book really to come out of the Coach Lab. He said, data don't just get up and walk around by themselves. If they don't align with some higher will, they'll just sit there. Those data are impotent, and they only become potent when somebody in charge wants something to happen. So no matter your role at your institution, these data really empower you to become that someone in charge of something happening. And over the last weeks and months, we certainly have that higher will now to make things happen with these data. So our first part of call in that journey, for that first part of call, I'm delighted to introduce Dominique Foster. Like Mai and like Amal, he's a doctoral fellow, a doctoral research assistant here at Coach, this time for just this summer. He's working toward his PhD in industrial and organizational psychology at North Carolina State University, where he also earned his master's degree in higher ed administration. His broad interests include organizational issues in colleges and universities, as well as faculty and staff work life. So you can understand why I leapt at the opportunity to bring him on board Coach. Even as we look to trim our budget, we knew how important it is for him to do this work. Dom was originally going to look at these Coach data to discover the predictors of faculty departure, promotion, and tenure, which is something we can still accomplish if we're supported by a group of institutions like a consortium or a system, or any group any of you want to get together to support our fund, frankly, our analysis to do this. But when the novel coronavirus struck, we were lucky to have Dom to deploy instead to conduct this novel analysis of a pandemic's effect on workplace attitudes for faculty. So I've spoken enough. I'm sure you're as eager as I am to see what Dominique has discovered and how it might lead to your interpretation of your results. Take it away, Mr. Foster.
Thanks, Kieran, for that introduction. Hi, everyone. For this portion of today's workshop, I will be walking you through our process for identifying how you should interpret Coach results in light of survey administration disruption caused by COVID-19. I'll briefly cover the analytical approaches, findings from our analyses, and recommendations for interpreting Coach results, as well as how to approach deeper analyses with respect to COVID-19 disruption. As a reminder, if you have any burning questions throughout the presentation, feel free to submit them in the chat window by directing them to all panelists. And Todd will be collecting those questions for the Q&A session at the end. So in mid-March, as no surprise to us, the threat of the spread of the coronavirus prompted immediate and pretty profound shifts in campus operations, including shifts to fully online learning and full-time work from home. These disruptions to normal operations came in the middle of the administration of the Faculty Job Satisfaction Survey. And this disruption also prompted some concerns from Coach partners about the validity of Coach data with the combination of two seemingly distinct groups of faculty evaluating two different institutional contexts. And these concerns prompted us to examine the kind of overarching question, did COVID-19 disruption have a meaningful impact on Coach results? And so I split this overarching question into two guiding questions. And so the first question is, did COVID-19 disruption affect faculty perceptions of their campus environment? This question deals with assessing whether the perceptions of faculty who completed the survey before COVID-19 disruption are substantively different from the perceptions of faculty who completed the survey after COVID-19 disruption. So in essence, are these two groups evaluating two different institutional environments? And are those differences practically measurable? And so I assessed this question by examining benchmark scores and individual item responses. The second question, did COVID-19 disruption lead to meaningful shifts in Coach results, deals with investigating just how different survey results look with the inclusion of post-disruption responses. Or in other words, even if there are practically measurable differences found between pre and post-disruption responses, would these differences drastically change the overall results that you receive in your Coach report? And so to kind of jump ahead and spoil the ending for you, I'll lead with the big conclusion that we're all waiting for, which is that We did find differences in perceptions pre and post disruption. However, these differences didn't substantively affect coach results. So before I kind of jump into the nitty-gritty of the analytical methods, please note that a detailed report outlining the entire process that I undertook to find these results, and including the results themselves, will be made available to you. And so my first set of analyses investigated differences in faculty perceptions based on benchmark scores. We conducted these analyses on the entire 2020 cohort of institutions, which we split by institution type. We included tenured and pre-tenured non-clinical faculty in the samples to minimize differences that would be attributed based on varying employment types and work expectations of non-tenure track and clinical faculty. Faculty samples were then split into 3 groups: a pre-transition group, which includes faculty who completed the survey between the survey launch and March 8th. In transition, which are faculty who completed the survey between March 9th and March 22nd. And post-transition, which are those faculty who completed the survey between March 23rd and the survey close. So after defining the sample, I followed a sequential flow of steps that effectively weeded out benchmarks at each stage to identify which benchmarks reveal differences in faculty perceptions pre and post-transition. So the first stage was to identify statistically significant differences between groups by conducting two-factor or two-way analysis of variance on each benchmark. Practical significance was then determined using Cohen's d for benchmarks with an insignificant interaction effect, but a statistically significant transition group main effect. And so following sort of a quasi-experimental philosophical approach, any benchmark with a statistically significant interaction effect or a transition group main effect in 2020 was then subjected to the same analysis using 2019 cohort data. And so the purpose of stage 2 was to investigate whether differences between pre and post transition groups could be adequately explained by some unobserved characteristics of early versus late responders. And so any benchmarks with statistically significant interaction effects in both 2020 and 2019, or benchmarks with practically significant transition group main effects in 2020 or 2019, would then be subjected to a more rigorous examination using difference in differences analysis. And so one important note here is that due to insufficient cohort data in 2019, liberal arts college analyses ceased at stage 1, meaning that any of the results that you'll see soon from liberal arts colleges are to be interpreted as correlational and don't imply causation. So as I alluded to earlier, perceptions were impacted by disruption, but we found impacts for only some benchmarks. Across institution type, across both university and liberal arts college samples, benchmarks pertaining to leadership, governance, research, service, facilities, and resources were impacted. But there were some benchmarks that were impacted for one institution type or another. So if you would take a few moments to identify which benchmarks were impacted based on your institution type. And there's no need to try to write these down furiously. This list will be made available to you at a later date. So just take a moment and then we will continue. So now that we've covered how perceptions were impacted by way of differences in benchmark scores, let's direct our attention to the actual impact that COVID-19 disruption had on benchmark results. And so the first and arguably most important finding here is that 75% of valid responses were collected before COVID-19 disruption. So this means that any movement that we might have found in averages will only be influenced by a small fraction of faculty. And so when we take a global view of the benchmark data for the entire 2020 cohort, we see that differences between benchmark scores with and without post-disruption responses are quite small. Most of the differences are so small that they overlap. So the black lines are benchmark scores without post-disruption responses, and the red lines are benchmark scores with post-disruption responses. So in the context of data use, differences this small really shouldn't change the content of dialogue to be had. Now, some of you may be wondering if a global view of differences is too high level to really get a good sense for the real effect at a particular institution. And so I went a step further and calculated the same differences pictured on the last slide, but for each institution in the cohort, and then calculated the average variance between benchmark scores with and without post-disruption responses. And so average benchmark scores varied, the variances of those benchmark scores, ranged between about 0.024 and 0.065. That's very small differences. And so this means that it is unlikely that the inclusion of post-disruption faculty responses will result in a substantive shift in benchmark scores. Additionally, I found that perceptions were generally more favorable for post-disruption faculty. And so to help visualize this, if all benchmark scores calculated with only pre-transition faculty or pre-disruption faculty were 3.0 on a 5.0 scale, which is represented by that straight black line, then the overall scores, including all other faculty, would be expected to make insignificant shifts, likely upward, as pictured with the red dot. Again, in the context of data use, the conversations prompted by a benchmark score of, say, 2.8 isn't likely to change much if the score were 2.9 instead. So shifting focus away from benchmarks, I also investigated individual items to identify which items represented notable shifts in perception after COVID-19 disruption. So I did this using the same university and liberal arts college samples that were used when conducting benchmark perception analyses. So I investigated liquor type items only using t-tests to identify items with statistically significant differences between pre and post-transition faculty perception. And so now with testing so many items, of course, the type 1 error rate or the rate of detecting false positives would be incredibly high. So to account for this, I chose to control for the failure discovery rate, which is a post hoc multiple comparisons correction that reduces the threshold for statistical significance and is useful when there's a large number of comparisons to be tested. And so practical significance was then determined with Cohen's d for items with statistically significant differences. I ran this analysis for the university sample and liberal arts college samples separately. And so I did find that there were practically significant differences in perception in both samples, 39 items for university faculty and 65 items for liberal arts college faculty. And in alignment with the benchmark results, the majority of these items relate to leadership, governance, and decision-making. So here are the top 5 items by institution type that were potentially impacted by COVID-19 disruption. Note these differences were all positive in favor of post-transition responses. And so take a few moments to skim through the list, and you will be receiving a full list of these, the full lists at a later date. So take a moment and just review those items. So what does this mean for you? So for data users and decision makers, you'd be relieved to hear that the recommendation is simple, that you are free to interpret benchmark scores and item frequencies as means as you normally would. And so for those who are interested in taking a closer look into your institution's raw data, I suggest following a similar analytic approach as you've seen today. First, recommending that you review the list of pandemic disrupted benchmarks and items for your institution type. And of those benchmarks and items, select the ones that are most relevant to your institution's current or future decision-making processes or strategic initiatives. If you find benchmarks and items that are of relevance, assess both the impact of perceptions pre and post transition and the actual magnitude of change with the inclusion of post-disruption responses. Institutions that receive raw data will be given a timestamp variable that they can use to assign faculty to the correct group based on your campus operations shift. And these two pieces of information together should provide you with adequate context to make decisions accordingly. Todd, any burning questions from the group?
Yeah, so first of all, let me just thank and recognize Dom for this work. It was really thoughtfully put together. It was designed in a way that was iterative. So each time we did an analysis, we took a step to understand the next layer of analysis. It was, to me, it was just a very comprehensive view of this. So we're really lucky to have you here this summer, and hope to keep engaging with you. We did have we've got two questions coming up. Let me start with Jason McGregor from Baylor. Jason asked if we did a similar analysis in prior years, because there's a possibility that we're just discovering that people who fill out the survey closer to the deadline just see things differently. So Dom, could you talk about how we manage that?
Yeah, sure. So we actually did do that for one set of analyses. We did that for the benchmark, to determine benchmark impact. We were only able to do that for our university sample because we did not have enough data. We chose 2019 to conduct the comparison with, and in 2019 we didn't have enough liberal arts colleges in that 2019 cohort to do the same comparative analysis. But for universities, we did find that for the benchmarks, for all of the benchmarks, there were statistically significant differences in both 2019 and 2020, which suggests that there is something to the idea that early versus late responder, those unobserved characteristics do exist in both samples. But for every benchmark in 2020, there were practical significance above and beyond that were found in 2019.
Great. So we got a question here from Susan at Rollins, and she wants to know about the directionality of the shift. So were faculty more positive or more critical, depending on whether they completed the survey pre or post COVID?
Sure. So on average, we were looking at means primarily throughout these analyses. On average, just about everything that we examined, we found that the results were in favor of post-disruption responses, meaning that post-disruption faculty saw their campus context as in a better light. Things were more positive, generally speaking.
Great. Michelle from UMass Amherst was asking, is this pre, during, post disruption comparison available in our campus level reports? I can answer this one in regards to this. So we are going to provide timestamp data in your unit record data files if you requested and plan to receive one. That's going to be a variable that's called Q2, which is the first question in the survey. When did they start the survey? Since the vast majority of faculty complete the survey in one sitting, we think you'll be able to get a pretty close approximation to these groups. And so you'll have that data available. It is not available in kind of our standard reports, but all the methodology, it's something that we're happy to share with you so that if you want to reproduce it locally, you can. Jumping back here, AJ Good had wanted to ask whether or not there were, whether you could share the effect sizes where they're practically significant. I don't know if you have that on hand or if it's something you can share later.
Yeah, that's something I could share now. I have it pulled up in another document if you give me 1 second. Okay, so I will jump in here and jump out of it quickly because we're about to look at an ANOVA table with a lot of results in it. So I don't want us to get too bogged down in that. All of this will be made available to you at a later date for you to look at the full results, but I will quickly show the practical significance levels. So let me find myself back. Sorry, my computer doesn't want to allow me to share my screen. So I can't actually show this to you right now, but they will be available in the future. I will tell you that for everything in the university sample, in terms of benchmarks, everything was, the practical significance level was small. Nothing was above 0.32, sorry. 0.32. So everything was considered small in the university sample. In the liberal arts college sample, everything was small except for senior leadership, nature of work service, and governance understanding. Those were considered to be medium effect size. They didn't follow the 0.5 recommendation. I knocked that down to 0.4, considering just how, considering the rest of the benchmarks ranged between about 0.2 on the nose and about 0.35. So everything that's above 0.4 really seemed to sit in its own kind of category there. So in context of these results, I made kind of the decision to make 0.4 that threshold. So there were 3 that kind of stood out above the rest in the liberal arts sample.
Thank you, Dom. And as you said, we'll share all of this. You know, this is part of you know, the service that we provide you guys, is to make sure you have as much data and analysis to help things move forward. A couple of other questions have popped up in the chat here. David Eichhorn, I believe from Wichita, was wondering, since the analysis was based on a sample in which only 25% of the survey was completed after the disruption, what if an institution has a really large percentage of faculty who did complete it late? There are a couple of examples of this that I know of within this cohort. Dom, can you help us think through like what we might consider for that?
Yeah, so I would still actually consider following the same analytical approaches that I have done here, and that will be present in the recommendations that will be provided with the technical report. If anything, having a more balanced sample would improve the robustness of the analyses that we've already done here.
Great. And then Laura Palucki-Blake from Harvey Mudd asked, for those of us with raw data, is there a recommendation on how large the sample of post-COVID faculty should be before we're concerned? Do you see a threshold, I guess, is maybe the question I think both David and Laura were trying to get at, where you might want to dig a little deeper into the analyses?
I think that really just, it should be determined based on what you want to know, if you're actually interested in certain findings. So for those of you who may just genuinely be interested in knowing how much does the needle move with the inclusion of those post-disruption faculty, if the smaller the number of faculty, obviously the smaller the magnitude of the shift will be. So if you're concerned that, you know, I only have 20 faculty members who took it after we shifted to online learning, then a simple, you know, like I did before, just look at that overall benchmark score compared to the benchmark score without those 20 faculty in it, should give you a pretty good idea of whether or not the interpretation that you're trying to make with your benchmark scores is valid.
And I would just add to that, you know, from an analytic approach, we tend to start with the benchmarks and then drill down as we see where the data lead us. If you may want to, I would recommend continuing that approach, always starting kind of at that top level and allowing that to kind of decide how you want to analyze the data later. Let's see. And Kieran, do you want to chime in? It looks like you posted something to the chat, but I think it'd be great if you want to just bring it up.
Well, just you know, Bob Goldstein has asked a question about, you know, it would be interesting to know if the results hold up as we pivot to the fall. And that actually resonates with the kind of the informal validation I've done of these results with academic leaders I've been speaking with over the course of the spring and the summer, especially as Dom found these results. The question is, why are faculty generally more satisfied with institutional leadership and governance in late March and April than they were perhaps in February and early March? And I wish with 100 people we could have an open conversation about that, because I'd love to hear what everyone's thoughts were. But to the folks that I've presented that question to, how would you explain this? They've all said that actually makes sense, because we acted swiftly and in the interest of our faculty very early on. Most of us did. They felt that we were acting in their interest of health and doing the right thing by closing down in the middle of March and in late March. And both of them said, if you asked our faculty now the same questions, we might see the results, soften up a little bit again. Without a fall administration of this survey planned, we won't know that for sure, but we do have a growing and robust cohort for the spring. It'll be interesting to at least try to map some comparison over time.
And if I could just chime in there as well, I mean, we're going to talk a little bit about process throughout the next series of workshops. Process really matters with faculty, and it's okay to ask these sorts of questions of your faculty in town hall meetings or in focus groups, or, but allow the data to drive those conversations. So look for the audiences that seem to be struggling more. Use it as an opportunity to target your conversations a little bit more effectively. All those sorts of things can help you not just think about the data from the snapshot in the spring, but how you move forward. Where is it that you still have trust and credibility? Where is it that you might need to do a little bit more retail work with faculty? That's part of the reason that we deliver the reports in the way they do, with divisional data, disciplinary data, as well as demographic data. You may find that non-tenure track faculty respond very differently to questions about governance than, say, your tenured faculty. Or you might find that, things like service burden were very different for women or for faculty of color, and those issues were exacerbated. The data is going to help you get there. And to that end, I just want to remind everybody, in your packet of reports that went out at the beginning of the week, we included a pretty detailed cover letter. It wasn't even a letter, it was a packet. And two of the pieces that we talked about in the packets are how you might use your data to think about life during this pandemic. And another piece was really focused on how might you use the data to think about issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion in light of all that's going on in our country right now. So I want to just give a pause for a moment or two. We're doing pretty well on time here. We're actually on time, but I want to make sure if folks have other questions about this before we jump into our next activity, exercise, that sort of thing. Looking with 94 people on the call, I can't see hand raising very well, so I'm counting on you guys to use the chat feature. All right, I don't see any more typing going on. So let's take a couple of minutes and talk about the next activity. For many of you who came to our strategy workshop last year, you might recall that we combined the folks who were receiving reports with the folks who were beginning this process. And so many of you got to hear from those campuses about reading those open text comments for the first time. And we got some really good feedback saying that this was something that's important for us to talk about. The lesson for us was that we need to help you guys not define exactly what it is that you need to do, but instead to be able to think it through so that you have a method for sharing open text comments or not that reflects your campus's culture and your leadership styles and those sorts of things. So that's what we're going to focus on for the next 45 minutes or so. So let me start out by saying that as we go into this exercise, it feels a little, to me anyway, I can see how it might feel anyway, that this is kind of out of order. Like, why aren't we just jumping into the reports? And the answer to that is that before you really begin to take an analytic approach to the data, you've really got to set some parameters with your team and with your campus about how you're going to handle this very sensitive data. Process matters to faculty, and process matters here at Coach for how we engage you. And so the thing that I would ask each of you to do is to be comfortable with the steps that we've taken and the order that we've taken things on. At the end of next week and the beginning of the following week, we're going to really dive into the reports themselves, and we're going to deal with those technical questions and those strategic questions. And hopefully you're going to do that with a better sense of what's going on. And then the final session, we're actually going to spend some time talking about building out your communication plan. And we're going to have a couple of our partners from different Coach institutions actually share what they've done and help you to hear about some of the hiccups and concerns and opportunities that they were able to take advantage of. So I hope that you'll find each of these exercises as an opportunity to kind of get out of your own headspace, to be comfortable thinking about different approaches, and to leverage the real power of the collaborative. Coach works because we get other colleges and universities to talk with each other about what's going on. So with all that being said, please do trust in the process. That doesn't mean you can't ask us other questions or have a call with us in the middle of a week outside of the strategy workshops, but we want you to trust the way that we're moving along here. So let's talk about the exercise. After I get done rambling for the next few minutes, we're going to give you guys a pause. We want everybody to have a chance to get a glass of water or run to the restroom or whatever it is you need. While you're doing that, our team is going to be assigning each campus to a breakout room. You will be assigned to a breakout room with your campus team, and you will be assigned to that breakout room with other institutions that are within kind of the range of your institution. So liberal arts colleges with liberal arts colleges, universities with universities. We do our best to try and match up folks that can kind of at least understand where you're coming from. I want to be abundantly clear from the beginning that every single one of you is going to have to deal with some form of a sensitive open text comment in your report. I have no doubt that you've all got something that you're going to read and you're going to wince a little bit. And that's normal. This is, we give faculty the opportunity to free write, and they free write. And that's okay. It's how we work with those comments that really matters. In terms of expectations, I want you to take advantage of this shared experience. Okay? You're all in this together. And we ask that everything that we talk about here, whether it be in your small breakout rooms or in the larger discussion at the end, that we keep that in confidence. This is an opportunity for everybody to kind of process. And sometimes that may mean we might say some things that aren't fully formed. Maybe we would filter it slightly differently if we had a little bit more time. Please give each other permission to do that. Please ask for permission. It's okay within a group to say, I'm still trying to wrestle with this. I'm going to try and say this, and please help me to frame it better. We're all trying to deal with these thorny issues, and it's really okay to be frank about that with each other. It's better to get them out here when you're working amongst people who all really understand your experiences than it is to do it in front of the faculty senate. So we want to give you that opportunity to trip up a little bit, to make mistakes, to take risks. So let's talk about the exercise itself. Earlier this week, we sent you a link, which I believe, Lauren, would you mind posting that link just in case folks haven't had a chance to look at it? In the time of the break, you should have more than enough time to read this. It's about a page and a half, a little bit of context. But the idea is we created an exercise here. And the goal of the exercise is not for you to have a fully formed policy about how you want to manage these open text comments. What we want you to do is have an opportunity to process it, to listen to other institutions, and to really begin to think about how you might tackle this with your coach team. Now, some of you have your whole coach team on these calls, and that's fantastic. And other of you might be a single person, and you're going to be kind of reporting back. Just for today, I want you to feel comfortable, working with whatever context you have. So it's about 2:43 right now. I'm going to wrap up in the next 2 minutes. So we're going to say by about 2:50, I'm going to finish by 2:45. By 2:50, if you jump back in, you should be assigned to your breakout room. We're going to give you about 20 minutes, and we're going to ask first that you pick a meeting facilitator and a note taker, like every other group activity you've probably ever done in the last 20 years. We're going to ask the meeting facilitator to really try and keep the conversation on subject, and the note taker to bring out any kind of highlights. There are some discussion questions that are built into the case, so you might want to keep that open, but they're just guides. They're not, there's no essay question at the end that we're going to ask everybody to complete in unison. Our team members will each be dropping into the room for a few minutes, but our job is not to be the resident experts. I did some math, and it turns out that the average number of years of academic administrative experience across our team is 0. We are all researchers and doctoral students. And so this is really about how you think about things. And we're there to help facilitate or maybe ask some guiding questions if the group is getting stuck. But we want you to be able to kind of shine in this opportunity. At the end of the session, we're going to ask you to come back to the larger group. You'll see an alert in your breakout room that says that you're going to be returned to us within a minute or 2 minutes. And we're going to do our best to have folks use the hand raise feature to bring to our attention if you have some comments, and I'll have some kind of broader group discussion questions. This all ties into your homework assignment for the next week. So when you get done here, we want you to go back to your campus team and start to formulate some decisions about how you might want to share those open text comments. And the idea is that you want to have maybe not necessarily a prepared full statement that's going to go on the IR website or the provost website, but you want to be able to give a coherent and rational response to faculty who ask to see the open text comments. And that can be, here they are, or it can be, well, tell us what you want and we'll go through and vet them, or we've hired a doctoral student to go through and do an additional round of data cleaning to make sure that confidentiality is protected. There's a range of options for you. And our job here is to help you think about what they might be. So I'm officially over my time limit. It's 2:46, but we're still going to try and come back together at 2:50. And I'm looking forward to jumping into some of these rooms and listening with all of you. So Lauren, I'll hand it off to you.
Yep, thanks, Todd. So as Todd mentioned, when you come back from the break, you should automatically be in your breakout group. If you're not, I will privately chat you about that. The breakout rooms will not be recorded, so feel free to have a candid discussion around these topics. And I dropped in the chat if anybody was not able to download the exercise document. I dropped that link in the chat box, so you can take a few minutes while we're on break to review that. All of the questions that are up on the slide here are on the second page of that document, so you can refer to the assignment as you're in your breakout rooms as well. All right, it looks like everyone is back with us. Todd, are you here?
I am here.
All right, take it away.
All righty. So first of all, let me just say, I really enjoyed listening to all of you guys kind of digest and think about this. A couple of things came up that I want to mention. The first one being that nobody should leave this session with a fully formed plan for what you're going to do with your open text comments. This is part of the exercise, is to kind of explore and be uncomfortable, and to do that with some other folks that understand where you're coming from, but maybe have a different contextual view. So don't feel like you need to have all the answers. We're working towards or through this process. The second thing I want to mention, and this is kind of a technical note, but it's something that just occurred to me as we were discussing. If your institution had custom questions with open text responses, we don't redact from that. We don't clean those, we don't code them, we don't do anything with them. They are raw. And so you'll really want to think about, and I hope, I know for most institutions, when you decide to do custom questions, that I try and provide some guidance on that. And one of the first things when somebody brings along custom questions that have open text responses is to say, make sure you've planned for the labor on the back end for this work, because it does take time and energy and resources to not just clean and redact them, but to make meaning of them. So if you did include open text custom questions in your survey, make sure if you haven't already, you've thought through an analytic plan for that and you've put aside the resources for that. So let me, let's see if I can switch my view here. I want to just give you guys all an opportunity for folks to chime in. And I'm trying to get to the point where I can see hand raising in the participant list, but if there's somebody from your group that wants to share something about their experience, the questions that you guys were bringing up with each other. I have some other notes, but I'd really much rather hear from you all. So who's going to be my first volunteer?
Todd, I'll volunteer. This is Susan. I was with a group of liberal arts colleges, Center, Harvey, Mudd, and Rollins. And just a couple things. We recognize that our institutions are distinct in how much transparency we have promised or is helpful, so that our faculty don't go down rabbit holes with the desire to analyze all the data themselves. And so I think it was really helpful to get us to see the range of contexts and to think about our own. And then one of the pieces that was on our mind is, in this period where we're attending to racial justice issues in ways we haven't since the 60s, the survey response rate because of COVID was a little bit lower than anticipated. And for at least small schools, being able to disaggregate the data in a way that doesn't reveal identities is going to be really tough. So we see the transparency, the need to uplift multiple voices, and the need to protect identity of individuals as being a real challenge when all come together. And then we talked a bit about how we address comments and fears in a way that we kind of step into it with the communications strategy so that everyone can embrace it and not be overwhelmed with challenges.
Thank you for chiming in. I do think, one of the reasons that we put small colleges with small colleges and universities with universities is because that I think size and composition of faculty really matters in these kinds of conversations. So I hope that showed through. I think I saw a hand raised from Matt at Delaware.
Yeah, that's right. So we had a group of research universities. We had Delaware, Connecticut, and UT Austin. And we kind of agreed early on that we're wary of sharing raw comments. As mentioned just now, the need to be anonymized is important, but also the danger of over-representing what might be unrepresentative statements. So we talked a lot about, you know, how and who should characterize and then credibly represent, you know, what those, you know, the sentiment from those comments, maybe using some sample comments or maybe not, but, you know, managing it that way, and ideally having a diverse group of stakeholders involved in that discussion so that it is, what's reported out is credible.
Yeah, I think it really is a great point. You know, the power of the qualitative comments is its ability to take, you know, a 3.75 on a 5-point scale and make it into reality. That's the most amazing thing about it. But as somebody, I think I said earlier in one of the groups, you know, the plural of anecdote is not data. And so we need to find the patterns in those qualitative comments in order to really be able to leverage the power of them. So I'm looking for some more hand raising. Looks like we've got Caroline from Florida International. Would you mind joining us? And then we'll go to Laura after that.
Yeah, hi, thank you. What you were all just saying about useful ways to use the qualitative comments, our team, someone on our team, a couple of them mentioned that they can and maybe should be used to identify what is going on in areas that are identified as problematic in the quantitative data. They are what can provide context and identify not just, like the quantitative data can tell you that something is going on, and the qualitative data can help you figure out what is going on. So I thought that was a very useful statement.
Great. How about Laura? Laura Kimball, you want to jump in?
Yes, I'll jump in. Hi, everyone. I think that one of the things that was a factor that was important to us is that if you are asking for data, you need to use it and to act on it. So these comments need to be, they do need to be analyzed and they need to be acted on. One of the things is that there seems to be, you know, within the data, there might be general things that could be information that could be released. We value transparency. We think that that's a very good thing. And so that there might be aspects of the data that could definitely be shared, but then others that would have to be redacted but still be acted on. So there was some concern about maybe someone coming back and saying, I reported something very important in the survey and no one did anything about it. So there's some sense in which, you know, the comments need to be carefully looked at to see if there was anything like that in it. Also the importance of that feedback loop, that if comments are made, that and I think that's a good point about triangulating that with the quantitative data, that whatever solutions are developed, the faculty are included in that. And then we finally had some discussion about where would these comments be shared if the decision was to do that, and would there be some structure, faculty governance structure within units or colleges within a university that could be somewhat the arbiters of that data in case that it was something about a dean or, you know, something like that, that those data could be reviewed. That's all.
Great, thank you. A couple of points I want to mention to folks, things that are kind of popping up in from the small group discussions as well. When Coach works with your raw data, we go through 2 levels of redaction. So the first one is really redacting identifiable information about the respondent. And in those cases, the identifiable, so for example, if you said I'm the only person of color, you know, in such and such department, we need to strip some of that in order to protect the confidentiality of the respondent. We also do our best to strip the identity of individuals who didn't complete the survey but are mentioned in the comments. And then the last piece is we strip out institutional identifiers. So if you happen to see in your qualitative comments things like institution or department or division, that's our way of making the data usable for our research purposes, without necessarily disclosing the identity of your institution, so that we're protecting, the institution's welfare as much as the individual respondents. Let me jump over to Tara from University of South Florida. She's got her hand up.
Awesome, thanks. So we were in a group with Maryland and talked a little bit about what principles already exist on our campuses to kind of guide how we navigate sharing this information. And then from there, we transitioned into some brainstorming of guiding principles. So as we think more about what this communication plan is going to look like at the institutional level with some specific stakeholders across campus, what are those things that we're really going to try to focus on and incorporate? Similar to what Laura said, transparency is really important, and we want to share the information from the get-go. But as we think about that, a big principle for both of our institutions was do no harm. So we want to make sure that things are aggregated at a high enough level where you can identify what specific unit it is. Because some of our units, they might only have 5 faculty members. There might only be 1 faculty member of color, like that other example. So we really want to make sure that no one can pick out who these individuals are, really thinking about what we choose to release versus what we're obligated to release. There are some other Florida state colleagues on the call, so you know about open record or public records requests and the Sunshine Law. So thinking about those things, and just also rules for making the data available was another thing. So if that kind of came from some of the examples, if people come over and they say, hey, you did this, we think it's applicable to X, Y, or Z, what is our coach team's response to those asks? Is there a process? How do we move forward with those? So those were all things that we talked about.
Awesome, thank you. Let's jump over to Brooke Vick. Brooke, do you want to jump in and tell us what you're thinking or what your group discussed?
Yeah, thanks, Todd. So I'm at Muhlenberg College, and that is a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania. And we were in a group with Ursinus College, another liberal arts college. We talked about many of the things that others have mentioned, whether at a university or a smaller college. But one of the things I wanted to amplify was actually an idea that, or a point that Dominique made, but that was really important to our group. And I know another group talked about in sharing comments, we don't want to overrepresent something that was, an individual comment or something that really wasn't indicative of a pattern. And when we were discussing that same issue, Dominique mentioned that one thing that is important, though, is the context for those individual comments, especially if those comments are representing people's experiences who are in underrepresented groups. And so at our small colleges, it's very possible that there are only 1 or 2 people that are going to mention the experience of being a faculty member of color working in a particular division in the college. And so it may be that there really aren't a pattern of comments that reflect this, but that the content of that comment is important nonetheless. And so he reminded us to really not to make hard and fast rules about how many people need to have made the comment for it to be something that we pay attention to, but also where is that comment coming from? Who are the individuals to the extent that they identify themselves in terms of their groups or their positioning for us to figure out what is important for us to share. So I really appreciated that from Dominique and just wanted to give him that light for giving us that. But a related thing that we discussed was really that we struggled to see the benefit of sharing word for word quoted comments with the larger campus community. But we also did share, I think it was Laura's comment, that transparency is important. And I think it's also, we thought it was also important that faculty feel heard through this. That was one of our big communication strategies, was to tell them that participating in this faculty job satisfaction survey was a way to be heard. And so we feared that if we don't share anything about the comments, that they may feel not only that they weren't heard, but that we were not truthful, and that their time was wasted. And we don't want to do that. And we also value the information and feedback they're giving us. So it seemed that what our two college teams were really leaning toward was neither of the extremes, sharing everything quoted and sharing nothing, but figuring out, is it most valuable to share the crux of the comments without sharing the quoted material. Also, as small colleges, we were concerned about anonymity, about people being able to figure out who said what. And that was a real concern for our faculty. It was one of the points of resistance for taking the survey. And so we were quite clear that we would not be sharing raw data and that they would not be able to be revealed. So where we were sort of settling was somewhere in the middle, where we can share the crux of what the comments are about without sharing the quoted material directly.
Great, thank you, Brooke. I also I want to mention a couple of things. Institutions that are getting your raw data back, those comments are not included in the raw data, so that you can't do kind of disaggregations by race and by rank and that sort of thing with the results. And that's also the same case in the reports themselves. We have talked about the idea of adding a filter for gender or for rank or for discipline. And we've always kind of circled back to the concern that once we add those functionalities in, the risk to the respondents is greater. And that's important for us to consider. Let me jump over to Lori Santiago from UH Clear Lake. She had a comment, and then we'll jump to Robin and then to Rachel.
So I'll be brief. We work with UTEP, and we are University of Houston Clear Lake, and we did a previous coach in 2016, so we have a little bit of experience from the comments, and we're trying to do better this time. We're trying to learn how to do a better job. One good point that was raised was try to look at the data by asking the question, what is the goal of doing the survey? Why are we doing it? And if the comments fit on that goal, then there's something that you need to analyze. If not, maybe you want to move them aside and see if they fit some other question that has been discussed on campus. It is important to let, and this we know by experience, to let the faculty know about the protocol that you are going to use. So at least they know you need to communicate how you're going to do this work. And we agree that sharing everything with everyone is obviously not a good idea. Maybe there should be some sort of pre-screening protocol. We didn't decide who should be in this pre-screening protocol, but we decided that was a good idea. Who will participate, maybe faculty. And there was a comment that the general faculty needs to see maybe some sort of qualitative summary of what the responses were, in addition to the themes, which is what UHCL did. We just looked at themes and then we quantified that. And I guess that was it. That's all I have in my notes.
Oh, thank you, Lori. And I'll just chime in a little bit there and just say that this is a great place where engaging some faculty who have reputations for being strong qualitative researchers can really help with this. Now, you've got to balance the perceptions around that, but I think, inviting somebody who really gets this stuff to be the lead and having it be from somebody within can really help, or at least partnering with somebody from within. So maybe your IR office and a faculty member work collaboratively on this, and the IR office takes the first pass, and the faculty researcher can deal with anything that's kind of flagged as being, concerning. But there are so many different models for this. And the most important things, I think, are transparency of the story, not necessarily of the comment, but how do we make sure faculty are hearing the story and the data, and then, of course, protecting confidentiality. Let me jump over. Robin, do you want to join us and tell us what you were learning?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the things that were said, so I was in a group with FIU and Louisville, and a lot of the things that have already been said are the things that came up in our group. The key thing we said was that no matter what, you can kind of restore some of the trust by mapping back the programmatic actions to the comments. Right? So you may not share them explicitly, you might kind of lump them, but you can build that trust if there's concern. Even, you know, the faculty may feel that because you didn't share everything, or because not all the faculty got to participate in the gleaning of the, you know, what's shared and what's not, you can rebuild some of that trust by the programs that you, the responses that you take to what's in the survey. And then I don't know if my provost hat squeezes a little too tight sometimes, but when the, you know, the Title IX particular comments and the fact that it's under litigation, to me, that was like, absolutely not, you would never share anything related to that. But that also brought up for me, there must be something else wrong on campus if there's actually, you know, more than one comment about something that's under litigation. We have a bigger problem than necessarily what's going on and revealed within the coach survey itself about faculty life.
Great. You know, I think one of the things that one of the moderators brought up kind of in our moderator chat room there is the importance of thinking about this data, not just as, you know, a bomb we're trying to defuse, that this is a powerful tool. And so as much as I want you guys to be thoughtful about this, I also want you to be excited about the potential in that qualitative data. So don't, it's important to kind of lean into this as best as you can. Doesn't mean you don't want to do it cautiously, but you definitely, you know, we want you to use every tool in that toolbox that we're giving to you. Hey, Rachel from Virginia Tech, why don't you jump in?
Sure thing. So we were in a group with UMass Amherst and Georgia State, and really a lot of what we talked about has come up already, but I do want to highlight a couple of kind of themes that we discussed, one being context. So considering the context of your campus, so any ideas that we have collectively will need to be considered in what's going on in your particular campus at this particular time. And that could be around distrust of leadership and transparency. There was also a conversation about thinking about the context of who responded to the survey, what the makeup of those groups were, not just from a gender and diversity standpoint, but also age, you know, full professors, older folks who may have a perception of the university that's informed from decades of this, you know, up and down transition of leadership and whatnot. And so really thinking about all of these activities within that context. We went back and forth on the idea of grouping the responses and trying to do some thematic qualitative management of the comments. Also balancing that again back to context with transparency, because it takes time to do that work of analyzing those comments. And so if you're on a campus where transparency is really important, then there's a timing, you know, there may be concerns if it's taking you too long to do your analysis. And so trying to manage that and be open, but still do the work. I appreciate some of these other comments about how to manage that, and sharing the process, I think, is a great idea of, hey, this is exactly how we're going to approach this. And so at least there's transparency in the process, if not in a quick turnaround.
Yeah, Rachel, that's a really good point. I just want to reinforce there, which is that we don't have to give out the full report immediately, but we have to communicate, you know, when things are going to be available. So maybe we provide just that kind of PDF report to start, you know, get the you know, the process started there, and then we go to the full HTML report where they can see all the dashboards and things like that. And then maybe we roll out the qualitative comments for, you know, once we've had a chance to analyze them and do a second review. But as long as you're being honest about that, I think faculty are more receptive to the idea that, you know, everything takes steps. I think one of the pieces that we sometimes forget about faculty is that they are all researchers. They all deal with some variation of data in one shape or form, and they understand the amount of labor that goes into analyzing data well. And so if you kind of call upon their their researcher minds and say, hey, it's not that we're dismissing you or hiding something, but we're just trying to do this as thoughtfully as you would any of your own personal research. I think that helps. Other folks with comments? It looks like we've kind of gotten the share back from the group, and we've done really well with that. I want to give a moment for each of the moderators to jump in and maybe bring up any points that they observed that didn't come up already. So I'll call out on each of you to do that. Let me start with Dominique. Dominique, can you join us and just there doesn't have to be anything, but if you did notice something, we'd love to hear from you.
No, I don't think I have anything that necessarily hasn't been shared. I really appreciate how thoughtful everyone is being about this, and not just kind of wanting to make a decision and get it out of the way so they can move on to the next, because that sometimes happens. We're all busy, and when we have a lot of reports in our faces and ad hoc things to come up that we have to get rid of and deal with, it can be really easy to just say, well, let's just go with X. It's the safest option and just move on. And so seldom do you see these really deep and thoughtful conversations. I won't say seldom, but I found that it's a little bit rare to see these thoughtful conversations happening. So I appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness. I will say that I really just want to continue to emphasize doing the difficult work of trying to balance getting those large repeat themes out there, while also amplifying the voices of those who may not be able to ever make it into a majority pool of comments. Balancing that is difficult, but I think it's incredibly necessary, especially considering the climate that each of our campuses are having to navigate, considering what's happening in our country and things. So that's all I kind of want to say. One, I love what's happening here, the conversation's happening, and two, just continue to kind of fight the good fight and figuring out how to best present these comments. One of the things that I did share in one of my groups, I think group number 4, was the idea of if you're presenting these comments in a presentation to either to a faculty group or creating a report, then finding a way to almost strategically kind of taking the sandwich approach, where the beginning and end of that presentation is those larger comments, those larger majority themes that you've uncovered, but also finding a way in maybe the middle of the presentation to take a pause and take a step back and look at some of those lesser, more infrequent comments or underrepresented comments, and just give way to the general idea of what's being shared in those comments, and not necessarily putting the actual comment in there word for word, but saying, these are the large themes we see. Oh, by the way, we wanted to amplify some voices that may not have made it into those large themes, and here's what we found. And then move on to, okay, now coming kind of back to bringing it full circle, so that the beginning and end of that presentation is really kind of at the top of people's minds, but they also recognize that you have taken the time to respect and give voice to those who might be in marginalized groups, or may be holding a position or a unique area of campus where their problem is unique, and this is the only way that they can share it. So those are my 2 cents.
Thanks, Dom. Let me jump to Amal. Amal, would you mind sharing any thoughts or observations you have?
Yeah, I mean, I have nothing to add really beyond what has been said. I think the one thing I observed that I think is important, and again, to echo Dominique, I'm very excited about, is there's a lot of struggle, but it's all productive struggle. And these are all dilemmas to be managed, and there's no right answer, but I love the attention to process. And to steal a quote from you, Todd, the more we can sort of trust the process, the more I think we can begin to spotlight the power of these data.
Thanks, Amal. Mai, would you mind sharing any insights? And I'm just going to give a little plug here that Mai and Kiernan will be published in Inside Higher Ed because of some excellent qualitative work that Mai has done with our exit and retention study. So you'll be getting lots of notifications when that comes out. But that's all based on Mai's good work.
Thank you, Todd. First of all, I wanted to just share again something I shared within the group, and that is a part of the work, I think, for us in the Good Fight is to sort of create a new critical mindset. And working with your web of influence and the people that you work with on campus, I think it's something, I think that to help people to see that discontent or disagreement or dissatisfaction is really opportunities for improving the institution. And within your group, if you could begin that conversation, I think that's a good place to start with dealing with the defensiveness and fear around some of these open text comments. I also want to return to Todd's point of process. I invite you all to see this process of delivering and putting these open text comment into action as a process. I can share that when I worked with the qualitative data, I worked with a broad lens in which we in the institution tend to understand, and that's that language of workplace guidelines and workplace expectations. So for example, when I went through the open text comments, I looked for really explicit language around hostility or chilly climate for underrepresented groups. And once I had that structural lens, then I can kind of break it down more into the diversity and inclusion lens. And I think that's a good way to look at this process is how do you begin at a place where everyone is going to at least have some understanding, and then you can work towards diversity, inclusion, and critical lens where a lot of, where we need a bit more education and struggle. And that's it. I wish all of you luck in putting all of this into action.
All righty. So I think I've talked enough about kind of my general observations. I think the only other thing that I would mention, this came up in one of the first groups I was in. I think it was USF, and forgive me for not remembering who the other group was that was with US. Was it and Maryland? The conversation was about the fact that some schools belong to the AAU data exchange, and the AAU data exchange has very clearly articulated data sharing rules, and that some of those rules apply to qualitative as well as quantitative data. And I don't bring that up because I understand that most of our partners are not AAU institutions, and that's fine. But the thing I wanted to bring up about that is that they have a framework for thinking about these rules. And that's actually really helpful. So you may want to think about what kind of frameworks exist out there that maybe aren't official university policy, but really might help us or help you to set some parameters that faculty can really see and understand, and and at least understand the rules that you're playing by, even if they don't 100% agree with them. So do think about that. I think the other thing that I saw, which was an interesting juxtaposition, was that there were a couple of comments in two or even maybe all three of my groups where folks said faculty could be concerned about retribution. And my response to that, as I really sat and I thought about it, because I heard it, like I said, a few different times, is this idea that if they are really concerned about retribution and they still chose to share that comment with you, that's powerful. That says something about how important it is to them. And so we have to do our best to make sure that we honor that in the work that we do with the results. That's everything that we have here. I just want to mention a couple of little logistical things. But before I do that, I want to go through what's going to happen in the next couple of workshops. So next Friday and next Monday, we're having duplicative sessions. And these are sessions that are really geared at helping you to unpack your reports, in particular data visualizations and how to navigate and that sort of thing. Those sessions, I believe they're blocked for 90 minutes. They're really only going to be about 30 minutes of actual presentation. In order to do those presentations, we'll want to make sure that you have been able to access, open, and share your report with whomever is going to be on that team, because they'll want to be able to look through it. As I said, those sessions are going to be duplicative. So Friday session and Monday session will be the same. Most of the time is going to be Q&A. And I've pretty much just planned to pack a lunch, and I'm going to stay here until every partner that has a question feels like they've gotten enough detail to move ahead. We don't want that to be a barrier to you using the data. The final session that we're going to have in, I believe it's August 7th, whichever that Friday is, the Friday after next, is going to be designed to talk about communication strategies. And we have two of our partners, one who's represented here today, Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt did a tremendous job sharing their results the last time. And another one of our partners from the CUNY system is going to be coming in. I believe it's Brooklyn College. They participated in Coach last year and have been incredibly transparent and thoughtful about how they share their data and how they're moving through the results. And so most of that session is going to be them talking about what's worked and what hasn't. And then we are going to give you a chance to do some Q&A with them. And we'll have some examples as well. Lauren's going to highlight some examples for you guys of some really good work. Please note, and we will we'll send out the agenda for all these sessions again, that every session comes with some homework and every session comes with some pre-work. So your homework for the next week or so is to develop the framework that you want to use for sharing your qualitative comments. We want you to have a document. It doesn't have to, this doesn't have to be like a fully IRB vetted document, but what's the criteria by which you're going to share comments? What's the process? What if faculty wanted to see some of the comments or wanted to be engaged in understanding the qualitative data? So we want you to take the things you learned over the last couple of hours and now apply it within your own context. Then next week, the pre-work for the sessions on understanding your reports is just making sure everybody has access to those reports. And please watch the tutorial videos. I can't begin to tell you how much effort it takes to produce those. And by effort, I don't mean anything by me. It's predominantly the work of the team here, especially Lauren, who's been has learned to be a video editor over the last couple of years just to make me not sound quite so bad. So so let me just throw out there if there are any other general questions or comments about the process, but otherwise I have just one closing thought. If there's a hand raise, I'll take it, but otherwise we'll just go. All right, so the last thing I need to say, Coach is about relationships, your relationship with your faculty, our relationship with you, and the relationships that we have as a team. And I need to take 30 seconds to thank, in particular, Lauren for coordinating all the logistics on this. None of us, I think, have participated in or have moderated a Zoom meeting with more than 10 people before. We had about 100 today. That was a pretty serious effort. The moderators, Kiernan, Mai, Amal, Dominique, thank you guys so much for being a part of this and for your incredible comments. Dom, in particular, your analysis. I'll just mention that as soon as Dominique, Amal, and Mai are all on the market, we're going to be advertising for them when they finish their doctoral work. And you've already gotten a sample of just how smart and how good they are. So if you have an opportunity, we'd love to send them to a great place like all of our partners are at. So anything else for the good of the order? All right, well, thank you all. We appreciate the work you're doing. We appreciate the risk that you take in doing this kind of tough work. And we'll see you next Friday or Monday.
Thank you.
Thank you.